deal with this coming period of uncertainty. So more arms sales, which of course Congress would be involved in as well. Taiwan, as you know, is extremely interested in, and has recently announced it will be building its own submarines, and the United States could have a role to play in that. And I think that the United States should be bolstering Taiwan's continued participation in the international community. But in the run-up to this election in Taiwan, I think it's important for the United States, as I said, to maintain consultations, to be talking with Beijing, so that China does not overreact to the potential election of a DPP president. And at the same time, I would say that the United States should remain neutral.
On the Korea-China question, let me just say something. I'm sure Chris will want to say something as well. My sense is that the Chinese have a lot of indigestion when it comes to North Korea. It's not an ulcer yet, but it's certainly a very sour stomach, and I don't think that has changed over the past quarter, and I don't think it's going to change over the next quarter. I think the South Koreans have been quite aggressive in trying to develop a strategic understanding with Beijing, with the Xi Jinping government on North Korea. It's one of the reasons that I think Park Geun-hye has been so enthusiastic about holding as many meetings, creating as many ties, NSC ties, defense exchanges, to try to deepen that understanding. At APEC, we saw that they announced the plans for a free trade agreement, the two leaders, which again I think is another sign that Korea is trying to step into a space that they see opening up between China and DPRK. Contrary to some perceptions, I don't think that the South Koreans are doing this hard push on China because of Japan, in the sense that they're angry with Japan, so they're trying to draw closer to China. That doesn't mean the Chinese don't see it that way. I'm sure the Chinese see it as an opportunity to try to pull the South Koreans out of the three-way alliance. And so in that sense, I think both Seoul and Beijing feel like they're winning at the game that they're playing, whereas the reality is probably neither of them are winning, but either of them are inching a little closer to their desired objective.
Thanks, Victor. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, as we've talked about and written about collectively with regard to China's approach to North Korea under Xi Jinping, I mean, my own view is a lot of ink has been spilt about the issue of have they changed their policy. I think we would all agree that at the fundamental level, they haven't. They're still the lifeline that keeps the North Koreans going and so on. As Victor said, there's substantial indigestion. I think it's actually edging more toward an ulcer at this stage. But and I think we're going to continue to see the same Chinese approach, which is to deny Kim Jong-un a visit to Beijing, which is obviously very significant. I don't foresee any senior Chinese leader going to North Korea either. And so the issue for me really isn't about change. It's about the normalization of the relationship. You know, Xi Jinping has clearly sent a signal that the Sino-DPRK relations will not be a special relationship that they've been since the Korean War, but rather a normal state-to-state relationship under which China takes clearly the very senior role. And the message, I think, has been from the Chinese side, we are the senior partner in this relationship. You, North Korea, should, you know, in a perfect world, should align with our interests or at least don't make trouble for us. And Kim has clearly been uncomfortable with that sort of view, and so I think we're going to continue to see this low boil. On Taiwan, absolutely agree with everything Bonnie said. I think it's a downrange problem, but one that the U.S. government in particular better start focusing on, because my sense is that this cross-strait issue will be back on the agenda. I agree that we should be doing everything we can to calm concerns about a possible DPP victory, but at some level I don't think the Chinese are going to be able to help themselves in that regard, should that result come. What will be interesting is to look historically. I think it's fair to say that during the Chen Shui-bian period, you know, the Chinese made a deliberate decision to kind of forego their interests in the South China Sea, or at least put it on the back burner while they focused exclusively on managing the cross-strait problem. And then when President Ma came in, they were able to kind of put their head up again and look, and we've seen what they've been doing down there. Should we have another turn in cross-strait relations, it'll be interesting to see what impact that has on the South China Sea, East China Sea issues as well.
add my purely personal view, Nadia, on President Chen. I spent many, many hours with him. He is a man who suffered, and his family suffered a lot in the process of democratization. And I think, speaking for myself, he's a man who suffered enough for what he did wrong during his time in the presidency. And in the interest of democracy in Taiwan, I think it's important for a new era where changes of government through the democratic process are not followed by vindictive actions. And, you know, the president was found guilty under due process. I'm not saying that it wasn't due process, but I think there's something useful in a magnanimous or forgiving view after a certain period of paying the debt back to society for Taiwan's long-term democracy. That's my own view. On the election, I think it will be important for the administration to be very disciplined. I personally was disappointed to read the Financial Times story during the last presidential election, which appeared to be an administration hit against Tsai Ing-wen. It may not have been, but I think it will be very important going forward to put as a first and foremost priority for U.S. policy respect for Taiwan's democratic process. And there are ways to signal expectations with respect to cross-strait relations and relations between Washington and Taipei, some private, maybe some public. But I think the administration has to be more careful and more disciplined than it was last time. That's not easy. Taiwan's democratic politics are not for the faint of heart. There's lots of, well, I was going to say there's lots of stuff flying in the air, and literally there's lots of stuff flying in the air in the LY. And in the Congress, there are strong views about Taiwan in different quarters. But I think the administration's got to be really very, very disciplined this time. It's important for our overall stance in the region. Where are microphone experts? Andrew, there we go.
Hi, Russ Deming at SICE. First of all, thank you very much for this report. Very useful to try to maintain a bipartisan approach to Asia. My question is on Japan. There's no really detailed treatment of the U.S.-Japan relationship. Abe now has a 3-year mandate, which raises risks and opportunities. We have the basing issues in Okinawa become more complicated with Okinawan politics, and we're now in the 70th anniversary year of the Second World War, which raises history issues as a problematic thing. I wonder what your thoughts are on managing U.S.-Japan relations over the next few years. Thanks.
Matt has graciously asked me to do the history question, and he'll address things that involve numbers. Although history does involve numbers, of course, because as you said, it's the 70th anniversary. It's an anniversary of many other things, the 21 demands and so on. I took some encouragement from Prime Minister Abe's New Year's address on this issue, where he said what I believe was the case all along, that he will keep the previous apologies by then Chief Cabinet Secretary Kono, former Prime Minister Murayama, and add his own statement of remorse. The model that I hear about, you probably too as well, Rusty, is the Canberra speech, which everyone should read if you're interested in Japan, because it was a really very emotional and forthcoming disposition by Prime Minister Abe before the Australian Parliament on what Japan did to Australia and the Kokoda Trail and elsewhere. Very emotional, very important for for Japan-Australia diplomatic and strategic ties. And I think a lesson that people around the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister himself are taking away as they think about the 70th anniversary. Okinawa is going to be harder after the gubernatorial election. I'm personally not convinced the new governor wants this to be the defining issue for a prefecture that has some economic challenges, but it's going to be harder. That is one of the reasons why I think it's important for the U.S. Congress to begin funding some of the military construction in Guam and elsewhere to show we're serious about lightening the burden on the Okinawan people and aligning our forces more geographically and politically in a sustainable way.
Well, obviously, this is a report with recommendations for the U.S. Side of this story, But as the economics guy, it's hard not to say from a Japanese perspective, I think the most important thing they could do, I mean, the thing which Abe could do that would have the greatest return on investment would be to get the Trans-Pacific Partnership done. And that means, agreeing to, as Mike said, we're very close on the substance. The U.S. and Japan need to reach an agreement on these final details. This would, I think, more than any other thing Abe is trying to do, certainly in the economic sphere, would have a very powerful impact on Japan's economic prospects, on its strategic position, and I think on U.S.-Japan relations, which brings it back here. I think that this is the thing the U.S. Should be, in the near term, most focused on, because it's the iron that is hottest in the fire right now, that we could strike a deal very quickly. I think the negotiators are going to re-engage later this month, and I very much hope and don't see why they shouldn't be able to reach an agreement. And if Abe is serious about economics being at the center of his agenda, and if President Obama is serious about TPP being a critical part of his legacy, then I would very much hope and even expect that they will reach agreement in the first part of this year.
Just to add on what Matt said briefly, I think the magic bullet, so to speak, will be when, until now, every free trade agreement we've done, as Scott has explained, has been preceded by Trade Promotion Authority, and with one small exception, with Jordan, right after 9/11, which is really not, a really unique case. The administration has decided this time to sort of move TPA and TPP more or less in parallel, presumably with TPA at some point coming first. It's asking a lot of our trade partners to trust us on TPA and give their best deal. It's asking an awful lot. There aren't many big issues left, frankly, in U.S.-Japan relations, but the ones that are there are stuck over this issue in a way, politically in Japan. My sense of the magic bullet would be that the President's initial volley in early December with the Business Roundtable about his commitment to getting TPA done is followed up with more engagement. And in Tokyo, they hear this not just from the administration, they start hearing it from the Republican leadership in Congress. And when they start hearing from the Republican Congress, we can get this done, then I think the negotiations bilaterally will be much, much easier. So that's why Scott and Matt emphasized in this report how important it is for a sustained high-level campaign, not just a one-off speech, but a real sustained campaign on TPP and TPA with the American public, with key interest groups, and especially with the leadership in Congress. In the way back with the red dress. Yeah.
Thank you, reporter from the Voice of America. And I have two questions concerning China. I'm reading an article which says that China is having a big diplomacy shift. And China also giving priority to its neighboring countries. So my question is how it's going to affect the U.S. pivot to Asia, because people say that when China is now also pivot to Asia. The second question is about Chinese Vice Premier Wang Yang's recent comment. He's saying that China, I couldn't remember the exact words, but it's like to the effect that U.S. is the leader, still the leader of the world. So what's your interpretation here? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question. The big diplomatic shift in Chinese foreign policy, I think, was really evident in President Xi Jinping's recent speech to the so-called Central Foreign Affairs Work Conference that took place a couple of weeks back now. And in that speech, and I think the subsequent things we've seen, it really is a reaffirmation of this notion that under his leadership, China has decided to take a much more forward-leaning approach to its foreign policy, a much more multi-directional foreign policy. And it was interesting in the speech that in terms of the batting order of prioritization, he did choose to put what they call peripheral diplomacy or neighbor diplomacy ahead of major country relations, thus being U.S.-China relations. We've spoken to, both Bonnie and I have spoken to a lot of Chinese interlocutors who all say, no, it's not a shift and so on, but these things get done deliberately generally inside their system. So I think what it means, and we mentioned this in the report, for our own administration and Congress is that this is a very dedicated effort that's being undertaken. She, in the speech, talks a lot about building Chinese soft power, talks a lot about using their economic leverage in the region, and we need to be aware that this is happening. I think that the administration has been slow to acknowledge this shift and to see that it is